I stood outside that Pentagon conference room, my face burning with humiliation, as VP Bradley's voice carried through the heavy door. "She's just a consultant. She waits outside," he told the military general with such dismissive arrogance that my stomach twisted into knots. I started to leave, my heels clicking against the polished marble floor, when General Thompson's commanding voice cut through the air like a blade. He stopped me mid-stride, his steel-gray eyes locked onto Bradley with the kind of cold intensity that could freeze blood in veins. "This consultant wrote the defense protocol. If she leaves, the U.S. government cancels the $5 billion contract immediately." The silence that followed was deafening. "My name is Judith, and 3 years ago I thought landing a consulting contract with Meridian Defense Systems would be the breakthrough that changed everything. I was 32, living in a cramped studio apartment in Arlington, Virginia, driving a beat-up Honda Civic with 180,000 miles on it, and drowning in student loan debt from my master's degree in cybersecurity from MIT. Most nights, I survived on instant ramen and coffee, pouring every ounce of my energy into creating something that would matter. Meridian hired me as what they called a temporary technical contractor. The pay was decent but not spectacular, and I had no benefits, no job security, and certainly no respect from the full-time employees who treated consultants like disposable furniture. But I didn't care about any of that, because I had an opportunity to work on something revolutionary: a quantum encryption protocol that could protect military communications from any cyber attack imaginable. For 18 months, I lived and breathed that protocol. I worked 16-hour days in a windowless basement office, surrounded by whiteboards covered in mathematical equations that most people couldn't even pronounce. The quantum encryption system I developed wasn't just an improvement over existing technology. It was a complete paradigm shift that would render current cybersecurity methods obsolete overnight. VP Bradley Johnson was the kind of corporate climber who wore expensive suits and spoke in buzzwords without understanding half of what came out of his mouth. He had perfectly styled silver hair, a corner office on the 20th floor, and a habit of taking credit for innovations he had nothing to do with. From day one, he made it clear that consultants were beneath his notice unless they were useful to his career advancement. The irony wasn't lost on me that I signed a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement, but somehow retained intellectual property rights through what the legal department later called an oversight in paperwork processing. At the time, I was so eager to work on cutting-edge technology that I barely read the contract details. I just wanted to build something that could protect American soldiers and intelligence operatives from digital warfare. What I didn't realize was that my quantum protocol had become the centerpiece of the largest defense contract in Meridian's corporate history. The Department of Defense was prepared to pay $5 billion over 7 years for exclusive access to technology that could revolutionize military communications worldwide. And Bradley was positioning himself to take complete credit for my life's work. The morning everything changed started like any other. I arrived at the office at 6:30, carrying my usual gas station coffee and a bagel that would serve as both breakfast and lunch. The security guard Marcus nodded at me with the kind of tired recognition that comes from seeing the same face every morning for 3 years. He was a good man, a veteran, who understood the importance of the work being done in our building. I settled into my basement workstation and began reviewing the final implementation specifications for my protocol. In 2 hours, General Thompson from the Pentagon would arrive with his technical review team to evaluate our system before the contract signing ceremony scheduled for the following week. I had prepared a comprehensive presentation that demonstrated every aspect of the encryption methodology, complete with live demonstrations and vulnerability assessments. At 8:15, Bradley's assistant called to inform me that my presentation had been canceled. Not postponed, canceled. When I asked why, she seemed genuinely confused and uncomfortable. "Mr. Bradley said consultants aren't included in executive briefings," she explained quietly. "He said he would handle all technical discussions personally." My blood ran cold. Bradley couldn't handle technical discussions about quantum encryption because he didn't understand quantum encryption. He barely understood traditional cybersecurity protocols, let alone the revolutionary system I had spent nearly 2 years developing. Yet somehow he planned to present my work to Pentagon officials as if he had created it himself. I spent the next hour pacing my office, trying to decide what to do. Confronting Bradley directly would likely result in my immediate termination. But allowing him to misrepresent my technology to military officials felt like betrayal of everything I believed in. This wasn't just about career recognition, it was about national security. If Bradley couldn't answer detailed technical questions, the Pentagon might reject the entire proposal, leaving American military communications vulnerable to foreign cyber attacks. The climactic moment came when I walked past the executive conference room and overheard Bradley speaking to a group of Meridian investors. His voice was confident, almost boastful, as he described his breakthrough invention that would revolutionize military cybersecurity forever. He was literally reading from my technical specifications, mispronouncing half the terminology while claiming to be the innovative genius behind quantum encryption protocols he couldn't even spell correctly. At 9:30, Bradley summoned me to his office with the casual indifference of someone ordering coffee. His corner office overlooked the Potomac River with floor-to-ceiling windows that probably cost more than my annual salary. The walls were covered with framed certificates and awards for achievements I knew he hadn't earned personally. His massive mahogany desk was immaculate except for a leather portfolio containing what I recognized as my own technical documentation. "Judith," he said without looking up from his computer screen, "I need you to prepare coffee service for 12 people and make copies of these presentation materials. The Pentagon review meeting starts in 30 minutes." I stared at him in disbelief. "You want me to serve coffee?" I wrote those presentation materials. "I should be explaining the technical specifications to General Thompson and his team." Bradley finally looked at me, his expression shifting from casual dismissal to active irritation. "You're a consultant. Consultants don't participate in executive briefings. Your job is to provide technical support when requested, not to interact with clients above your clearance level." Above my clearance level, I couldn't keep the incredulity out of my voice. "I have top secret clearance." I wrote the protocols they're reviewing. "Nobody in this company understands the quantum encryption system better than I do." "Nobody in this company needs to understand it better than I do," Bradley replied coldly. "I'm the vice president of advanced technologies. The Pentagon is here to discuss strategic implementation, not technical minutiae. Frankly, you wouldn't understand the broader implications of what we're discussing." The condescension in his voice hit me like a physical blow. For 3 years, I had endured dismissive treatment from full-time employees who viewed consultants as temporary annoyances. But this was different. This was theft. Bradley wasn't just dismissing me. He was actively stealing my intellectual property and claiming credit for innovations that could shape military cybersecurity for decades. "Those aren't your innovations," I said quietly. "Every algorithm, every encryption methodology, every security protocol in that presentation came from my research. You can't present my work as your own achievement." Bradley's smile was genuinely unnerving. "Actually, I can. Everything you developed while under contract with Meridian belongs to Meridian. And as vice president, I represent Meridian in all client interactions. Your name appears nowhere on any client-facing documentation, and it never will." "I have documentation proving my authorship," I replied, though even as I said it, I realized how weak my position actually was. "Do you?" Bradley opened a filing cabinet and pulled out a thick folder. "Because according to our legal department, you signed a comprehensive work-for-hire agreement that transfers all intellectual property rights to Meridian Defense Systems. You have no ownership claim to anything you developed using our resources, our facilities, or our equipment." My heart sank as I realized the trap I had walked into 3 years earlier. In my eagerness to work on cutting-edge technology, I had signed away rights to my own innovations without understanding the legal implications. Bradley had planned this from the beginning, hiring me as a consultant specifically to avoid sharing credit for breakthrough discoveries. Even if that's legally accurate, I said desperately, you don't understand the technology well enough to answer detailed questions. What happens when General Thompson asks about implementation specifics or vulnerability assessments? I'll handle it, Bradley replied with absolute confidence. I've been briefed on all the essential elements. Besides, military officials aren't interested in technical complexities. They want strategic assurance that our system meets their operational requirements. 20 minutes later, I found myself in the humiliating position of serving coffee to Pentagon officials, while Bradley prepared to present my life's work as his own brilliant creation. General Thompson was exactly what I expected from a career military officer, sharp-eyed, no-nonsense, with the kind of bearing that commanded instant respect. His technical review team included 3 cybersecurity experts whose reputations I had followed throughout my academic career. The conference room filled with Meridian executives, Pentagon officials, and investors who saw dollar signs dancing in their heads. Bradley stood at the head of the table, laser pointer in hand, ready to deliver what he clearly believed would be the presentation of his career. The irony was suffocating. Here was my quantum encryption protocol, my mathematical breakthroughs, my innovative security methodologies being presented by someone who couldn't explain the difference between symmetric and asymmetric encryption. As I refilled coffee cups and distributed copies of technical documentation I had written, I listened to Bradley begin his presentation with growing horror. He mispronounced fundamental terminology, confused basic concepts, and described implementation processes in ways that made no technical sense. When General Thompson asked about quantum key distribution protocols, Bradley's response was so inadequate that I saw the Pentagon team exchange concerned glances. The breaking point came when one of the military cybersecurity experts asked about potential vulnerabilities in the encryption methodology. It was a reasonable question that any competent system developer should be able to address comprehensively. Bradley's response was to shuffle through his notes and suggest that security concerns had been thoroughly evaluated by our technical team. Which technical team? General Thompson asked pointedly. We'd like to speak with the actual developers who created these protocols. Bradley's face flushed slightly, but his voice remained confident. Our development team consists of classified personnel whose identities can't be disclosed for security reasons. However, I personally supervised every aspect of the creation process and can address any technical concerns you might have. That was when I realized Bradley intended to completely erase my contribution from the official record. Not only was he stealing credit for my work, but he was actively preventing me from ever being acknowledged as the system's creator. In his version of events, I didn't exist. My 3 years of research, my innovative breakthroughs, my mathematical discoveries had all been accomplished by classified personnel under his brilliant supervision. I watched General Thompson's expression grow increasingly skeptical as Bradley continued to fumble through technical explanations he clearly didn't understand. The Pentagon team was beginning to realize that Meridian's vice president of advanced technologies had no actual understanding of the technology he was trying to sell them. The climactic moment of this humiliating charade came when General Thompson asked a direct question about quantum decoherence mitigation in high-stress operational environments. It was exactly the kind of detailed inquiry I had anticipated and prepared for extensively. Bradley stared at the general for several long seconds, clearly having no idea what the question meant, let alone how to answer it. That's a very technical question, Bradley finally replied. Perhaps we should schedule a follow-up meeting where our engineering team can provide more detailed specifications. The engineering team that can't be identified for security reasons. General Thompson's tone carried a sharp edge that made everyone in the room uncomfortable. Exactly, Bradley replied, apparently missing the skepticism in the general's voice entirely. That was when General Thompson stood up, his expression shifting from professional courtesy to barely contained irritation. Mr. Bradley were prepared to award a $5 billion contract based on revolutionary cybersecurity technology. I need to speak with someone who actually understands what they're selling. I understand perfectly, Bradley insisted. I've been briefed on all the technical essentials. General Thompson's response was delivered with military precision. Then you won't mind if we conduct an impromptu technical evaluation right now. We'll ask specific questions about implementation protocols, and you can demonstrate your comprehensive understanding of the system you're asking us to purchase. What happened next defied every expectation I had about corporate politics and military procurement procedures. General Thompson didn't just ask technical questions. He conducted what amounted to a real-time competency evaluation that exposed Bradley's complete ignorance in front of everyone who mattered to his career. Explain the mathematical foundation for your quantum key distribution algorithm. General Thompson began pulling out a tablet to take notes. Bradley's confident expression flickered for just a moment before he launched into a response that combined technical buzzwords in ways that made no actual sense. Well, the quantum distribution utilizes advanced mathematical protocols to ensure secure key transmission through encrypted channels that prevent unauthorized access via quantum computing methodologies. I physically winced. It was like watching someone try to perform surgery using medical terminology they had memorized from television shows. Every technical professional in that room could tell that Bradley had no idea what he was talking about. That's not a mathematical explanation, General Thompson replied flatly. That's marketing language. I asked about the mathematical foundation. Show me the equations. Bradley fumbled through his presentation materials, clearly hoping to find something that looked sufficiently complex to satisfy the general's inquiry. What he found instead were my carefully annotated mathematical proofs covered in equations he couldn't begin to interpret, let alone explain. These calculations are highly classified, Bradley said desperately. I'm not authorized to discuss specific mathematical methodologies in this setting. Mr. Bradley. General Thompson's voice carried the kind of authority that comes from 30 years of military service. We're in a secure facility discussing a classified defense contract. Everyone in this room has appropriate clearance levels. Either you understand the technology you're selling or you don't. Which is it? The silence that followed was excruciating. Bradley stood at the front of the room, laser pointer trembling slightly in his hand, facing the realization that his elaborate deception was crumbling in real time. The Meridian executives looked mortified. The investors appeared confused and increasingly concerned about the viability of their financial commitment. That was when I made a decision that changed everything. I couldn't watch my life's work be misrepresented by someone who didn't understand it, especially when national security was at stake. I stepped forward from my position near the coffee service station. General Thompson, I said quietly, I wrote those equations. The room erupted. Bradley spun around to face me, his expression shifting from panic to pure fury. Judith, you're out of line. Return to your station immediately. No, I replied, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. I won't watch you misrepresent technology that could protect American military personnel when you don't understand how it works. General Thompson's intense gaze fixed on me with the kind of attention that made me understand why he had risen to such a high-ranking position. You wrote the quantum encryption protocols. Every algorithm, every security methodology, every mathematical proof in that presentation, I confirmed. I spent 2 years developing this system. I can answer any technical question you have about implementation vulnerabilities or operational requirements. Bradley's face had gone completely white. She's just a consultant, he said to General Thompson, his voice cracking slightly. She has no authority to speak in this meeting. I'm going to have to ask security to escort her out. Actually, General Thompson replied, his tone carrying deadly calm, I think we need to have a very different conversation. Everyone except Meridian executive leadership and Pentagon personnel, please leave the room immediately. The investors filed out looking bewildered and concerned. Support to staff disappeared quickly. Within minutes, only the core participants remained: Bradley, 2 other Meridian executives, myself. General Thompson, and his three-person technical review team. Now, General Thompson continued, let's establish some facts. Ms. Judith Mitchell, I replied, then caught myself. That wasn't right. My last name wasn't Mitchell. My mind was racing from adrenaline and stress. I mean, Judith Kellerman. Ms. Kellerman, you claim to be the primary developer of the quantum encryption protocols that Meridian is asking us to purchase for $5 billion. That's correct. And Mr. Bradley, you claim to have personally supervised the development of these same protocols. Yes, I supervised the entire development process, Bradley replied, though his confidence had evaporated entirely. General Thompson turned to his technical team. I'd like you to conduct separate interviews with both of these individuals. Ask detailed questions about implementation specifics, mathematical foundations, and potential vulnerabilities. We'll compare their responses and determine who actually understands this technology. What followed was the most intense 45 minutes of my professional life. General Thompson's cybersecurity experts didn't just ask questions. They conducted what amounted to a graduate-level oral examination, covering every aspect of quantum encryption theory and practical implementation. I was able to answer every question in detail, explaining not just what the protocols did, but why I had designed them that way, what alternatives I had considered, and how the system could be adapted for different operational environments. When they asked about potential vulnerabilities, I walked them through the three theoretical attack vectors I had identified and the countermeasures I had developed to address each one. Bradley's interview, conducted simultaneously in an adjacent conference room, was apparently a disaster of epic proportions. When the teams reconvened, the lead Pentagon cybersecurity expert delivered his assessment with clinical precision. Ms. Kellerman demonstrates comprehensive understanding of the quantum encryption protocols, including mathematical foundations, implementation specifics, and security considerations. Her responses indicate intimate familiarity with every aspect of the system development process. He paused, glancing at Bradley with barely concealed contempt. Mr. Bradley was unable to answer basic questions about encryption methodology and appeared to have no understanding of the technology beyond superficial marketing language. The silence that followed was deafening. General Thompson's expression was unreadable, but I could sense the wheels turning behind his steel gray eyes. Finally, he turned to Bradley with the kind of look that could freeze fire. Mr. Bradley, it appears you've been misrepresenting your role in this technology development. That's concerning from a procurement perspective, but it's potentially criminal from a federal contracting perspective. There's been a misunderstanding, Bradley said desperately. I supervised the development process. The technical details were handled by subordinates, but I provided strategic oversight and direction. Strategic oversight, General Thompson repeated slowly. And yet you can't explain how the technology actually works. You can't address basic security questions, and you claim the actual developer is just a consultant who shouldn't be in the room. That was when I realized something that chilled me to the bone. This wasn't just about stealing credit for my work. Bradley had systematically planned to erase my involvement entirely, positioning himself to profit from my innovations, while ensuring I could never prove my contribution. It was intellectual property theft on a scale that could destroy my career and possibly violate federal contracting regulation. The climactic twist came when General Thompson asked a question that changed everything. Ms. Kellerman, do you have documentation proving your role in developing these protocols? I have research notes, algorithm drafts, mathematical proofs, and development timelines, I replied. But according to Meridian's legal department, everything I created while under contract belongs to the company. That may be true for intellectual property rights, General Thompson said thoughtfully, but it doesn't change authorship facts. The Pentagon needs to know who actually created the technology we're purchasing, regardless of who owns it legally. He turned to Bradley with an expression that could cut through steel. Mr. Bradley, did Ms. Kellerman create the quantum encryption protocols that form the basis of this contract proposal? Bradley's mouth opened and closed several times without producing any sound. Finally, he managed to whisper, She contributed to the technical development process. She contributed, General Thompson repeated, or she created. The room held its collective breath as Bradley faced the choice between admitting fraud and committing perjury to federal officials. His career, his reputation, and possibly his freedom hung in the balance of his next words. She was the primary technical developer. Bradley finally admitted, his voice barely audible. General Thompson nodded slowly. I thought so, which means we have a very serious problem with this procurement process. The moment Bradley admitted I was the primary developer, something shifted in the room's atmosphere that I could feel in my bones. General Thompson's expression didn't change, but there was a subtle alteration in his posture that suggested military wheels turning behind his carefully neutral facade. The other Pentagon officials exchanged glances that spoke of protocols and procedures I wasn't privy to understanding. This meeting is concluded, General Thompson announced with crisp authority. Meridian Defense Systems will receive written notification regarding the status of this contract proposal within 48 hours. Ms. Kellerman, I'd like you to remain available for additional consultation if needed. Bradley looked like he had been punched in the stomach. The color had drained from his face entirely, and his hands were visibly trembling as he gathered his presentation materials. The other Meridian executives appeared shell-shocked, clearly realizing that their $5 billion contract had just evaporated before their eyes. As the Pentagon team prepared to leave, General Thompson approached me with the kind of direct intensity that made me understand why he commanded respect throughout the military hierarchy. Ms. Kellerman, what's your current employment status with Meridian? I'm an independent contractor, I replied. My current contract expires in 2 weeks. I see. And do you have other professional commitments following that expiration? Before I could respond, Bradley stepped between us with renewed desperation. General Thompson, I hope you understand that any consultation with Ms. Kellerman would need to be coordinated through proper Meridian channels. She's bound by comprehensive non-disclosure agreements, and her work product remains proprietary to our company. General Thompson's gaze shifted to Bradley with the kind of cold assessment that could freeze molten steel. Mr. Bradley, I suggest you focus on addressing the misrepresentation issues we've identified, rather than attempting to dictate Pentagon consultation procedures. The implied threat in that statement hung in the air like smoke from a forest fire. Bradley's mouth opened as if to respond, then closed again as he apparently realized that challenging a military general's authority might not be the wisest course of action given his current circumstances. After the Pentagon team departed, I found myself alone in the conference room with Bradley and 2 other Meridian executives whose names I had never bothered to learn. The silence stretched uncomfortably until Bradley finally spoke, his voice carrying a combination of fury and panic that made my skin crawl. You've destroyed everything, he said quietly. 3 years of relationship building, months of contract negotiations, the biggest deal in company history. Gone. Because you couldn't keep your mouth shut. I prevented you from committing fraud, I replied, surprised by my own calmness. The Pentagon would have discovered your deception eventually. Better now than after they've paid $5 billion for technology you can't support or maintain. My deception, Bradley's voice rose to near shouting level. I supervised your work. I provided strategic direction. I secured funding and resources. You're a temporary contractor who wouldn't even be here without my authorization. One of the other executives, a woman whose title I thought was something related to legal compliance, cleared her throat nervously. Bradley, perhaps we should discuss this privately. No, Bradley snapped. She needs to understand the consequences of what she's done. Judith, you're terminated immediately. Security will escort you from the building and you have 30 minutes to clear out your workspace. You can't terminate me, I replied. I'm not an employee. I'm an independent contractor with a written agreement that runs for 2 more weeks. Actually, we can, the legal compliance executive said apologetically. There's a clause in your contract allowing for immediate termination in cases of insubordination or breach of professional conduct standards. My heart sank as I realized they had me trapped. The same contract that had stripped away my intellectual property rights also gave Meridian broad authority to end our relationship whenever they chose. I would be escorted from the building with no access to my research materials, no opportunity to document my contributions, and no way to prove my role in developing the quantum encryption protocols. However, the legal executive continued glancing nervously at Bradley, terminating the primary developer immediately after a failed Pentagon presentation might raise additional questions about the company's technical capabilities and employment practices. Bradley's expression shifted to something approaching panic. What do you mean? I mean, the Pentagon might wonder why we're firing the person who actually understands our flagship technology right after they exposed gaps in executive technical knowledge. It could suggest we're retaliating against whistleblowing or attempting to suppress evidence of misrepresentation. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Bradley was trapped between his desire for revenge and the realization that terminating me might provide additional evidence of his fraudulent behavior to federal investigators who were probably already scrutinizing Meridian's contracting practices. 2 weeks, Bradley finally said through gritted teeth. You work your final 2 weeks, you keep your mouth shut about everything that happened today, and you disappear quietly when your contract expires. No media interviews, no social media posts, no communication with Pentagon officials, complete silence. And if I don't agree to those conditions, I asked, then we terminate you immediately for cause dispute any final payments owed and make sure every defense contractor in the Washington area knows you're unreliable and disloyal to employer interests. It was a threat designed to destroy my career prospects in the only industry where my specialized skills had value. Defense contracting was a small community where reputation meant everything and blacklisting could be permanent. Bradley was offering me a choice between quiet compliance and professional suicide. But as I sat there listening to his ultimatum, something crystallized in my mind that changed everything. I wasn't just a victim of corporate politics or intellectual property theft. I was the creator of technology that could protect American military personnel from cyber attacks that could cost lives. And I was the only person who truly understood how that technology worked. I'll take the 2 weeks, I said quietly. Bradley's smile was genuinely unnerving. Smart choice. Remember complete silence. Any violation of that agreement and the consequences will be severe. That evening, sitting in my cramped apartment with a microwave dinner and a glass of cheap wine, I began planning the most important project of my professional life. Not another algorithm or encryption protocol, but a comprehensive documentation of everything I had created for Meridian Defense Systems and everything Bradley had done to steal credit for my work. I spent the next 4 days methodically copying every email, every research note, every algorithm draft, and every technical specification that proved my authorship of the quantum encryption protocols. I was careful to access only materials that were legitimately mine and to avoid anything that might be construed as corporate espionage or theft of proprietary information. What I discovered during that process was more disturbing than I had imagined. Bradley's pattern of taking credit for subordinate innovations went back years and involved at least 6 other technical professionals who had been quietly pushed out after their breakthrough discoveries were attributed to his strategic leadership. The company had a systematic approach to exploiting consultant expertise while denying consultants any recognition or career advancement opportunities. More importantly, I found evidence that Bradley had been actively misrepresenting technical capabilities to potential clients for months, promising functionality that didn't exist and performance standards that hadn't been achieved. The quantum encryption protocols were just the latest example of his willingness to oversell and underdeliver, putting both corporate reputation and national security at risk. By Friday of that week, I had assembled a comprehensive portfolio documenting not just my own contributions, but a pattern of corporate fraud that extended far beyond my individual situation. And I had made a decision that would either vindicate my professional integrity or destroy my career entirely. I was going to contact General Thompson directly. The climactic moment came when I realized that my situation wasn't unique or isolated. Bradley wasn't just stealing credit from me. He was systematically exploiting technical professionals throughout the defense contracting industry, misrepresenting capabilities to military officials, and potentially compromising national security through his incompetence and dishonesty. This wasn't about my career anymore. It was about protecting the integrity of military procurement processes and ensuring that American defense systems were actually as secure as contractors claimed them to be. On Monday morning of my final week at Meridian, I arrived at the office to find two FBI agents waiting in the lobby with briefcases and expressions that could cut through reinforced concrete. Special Agent Patricia Williams introduced herself with the kind of professional courtesy that immediately made me nervous, while her partner, Special Agent David Chen, observed our interaction with the sharp attention of someone trained to catch deception. Ms. Kellerman, we need to speak with you regarding allegations of unauthorized disclosure of classified information and potential violations of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, Agent Williams explained as she displayed her credentials. My blood turned to ice water in my veins. I'm sorry, what allegations? You've been accused of accessing classified materials outside your authorization scope, copying proprietary information belonging to Meridian Defense Systems, and potentially sharing sensitive defense-related data with unauthorized individuals. I stared at them in complete shock. That's absolutely not true. I've never violated any security protocols or shared classified information with anyone. Agent Chen stepped forward with a warrant that looked official enough to stop my heart. We have authorization to search your residence, seize your electronic devices, and examine any materials that might contain proprietary information belonging to Meridian Defense Systems or classified data related to defense contracts. The next 6 hours were the most terrifying of my entire life. Federal agents dismantled my apartment, systematically seizing my laptop, desktop, computer tablet, smartphone, and every storage device they could find. They photographed my research notes, collected my technical journals, and even confiscated university textbooks that contained mathematical equations similar to those I had used in my quantum encryption work. This is insane, I kept repeating as agents cataloged my possessions. I never stole anything. Everything I have is either publicly available research or original work I created myself. That's for the investigation to determine, Agent Williams replied without emotion. You're not under arrest at this time, but we strongly advise you to retain legal counsel and avoid any contact with Meridian employees or Pentagon personnel while this matter is being resolved. By evening, my entire life had been turned upside down. My bank accounts were frozen pending investigation. My security clearance was suspended immediately, effectively ending any possibility of defense-related employment. Local news stations were reporting that a rogue contractor was under federal investigation for stealing military secrets and potentially compromising national security. The media coverage was devastating. Channel 7 News described me as a disgruntled consultant accused of intellectual property theft and security violations. The Washington Times ran a story about foreign infiltration of defense contracting that strongly implied I might be working for hostile foreign governments. Online forums exploded with speculation about my motives and background. My landlord called that evening to inform me that my lease might be terminated early due to criminal activity that could endanger other tenants. My car insurance company sent a letter indicating they were reviewing my policy in light of federal investigation circumstances. Even my graduate school alumni association sent an email suggesting I might want to distance myself from university affiliations until legal matters were resolved. The crushing reality was that my entire professional and personal life was disintegrating based on accusations I couldn't defend against because I didn't know what evidence had been presented to federal investigators. I had no access to my own research materials, no way to prove my innocence, and no understanding of how the situation had escalated from corporate politics to federal criminal investigation in less than a week. That's when I realized Bradley had orchestrated the perfect frame-up. By accusing me of stealing information I had actually created, he had turned my expertise into evidence of criminal activity. My deep knowledge of quantum encryption protocols wasn't proof of authorship. It was suspicious familiarity with classified materials. My research notes weren't documentation of original work. They were potential evidence of unauthorized data collection. Tuesday morning brought even worse news. My court-appointed attorney, a tired-looking public defender named Margaret Foster, met me at a downtown coffee shop to explain the charges I was potentially facing. "The allegations are serious," she said, reviewing a thick folder of legal documents. "Violation of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act carries penalties of up to 10 years in federal prison. Unauthorized disclosure of classified information could add another 20 years. Corporate espionage charges could result in additional fines and imprisonment." "But I didn't do any of those things," I protested. "I created the technology they're claiming I stole. I have documentation proving my authorship." According to the FBI, that documentation was obtained through unauthorized access to Meridian computer systems. Attorney Foster replied grimly. "They're claiming you used your contractor access to copy proprietary information you weren't authorized to possess." The beautiful irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. Bradley had turned my own research notes into evidence against me by claiming they contained information I shouldn't have been able to access. The mathematical proofs I had developed were being presented as classified materials I had stolen. My innovative algorithms were being described as proprietary secrets I had illegally copied. "What about the Pentagon meeting where I demonstrated my knowledge of the technology?" I asked desperately. "According to witness statements, you interrupted a classified briefing and attempted to disrupt contract negotiations through unauthorized disclosure of sensitive information," Attorney Foster explained. "Meridian executives are claiming you were attempting industrial sabotage, motivated by employment dissatisfaction." My heart sank as I realized how thoroughly Bradley had anticipated and planned for this scenario. Every action I had taken to prove my authorship had been reframed as evidence of criminal intent. My attempt to prevent fraud had been characterized as fraud itself. Wednesday brought the final crushing blow. General Thompson's office issued a statement indicating that the Pentagon was cooperating fully with federal investigators and had suspended all contact with individuals under investigation for security violations. The $5 billion contract was officially canceled, with Meridian's stock price dropping 30% in after-hours trading. Local media portrayed the contract cancellation as evidence that I had successfully sabotaged American defense capabilities, possibly as part of a foreign intelligence operation. Online conspiracy theories suggested I was part of a broader plot to compromise military cybersecurity through insider infiltration of defense contractors. The isolation was suffocating. Former colleagues avoided me completely, crossing the street when they saw me coming. My few friends were afraid to maintain contact with someone under federal investigation. Even casual acquaintances like grocery store clerks and coffee shop employees treated me with suspicion after seeing news reports about the rogue contractor. Thursday evening, I sat alone in my nearly empty apartment surrounded by moving boxes and legal documents, trying to understand how my attempt to prevent fraud had resulted in my own destruction. Bradley had won completely. He had eliminated me as a threat, discredited my claims about authorship, and positioned himself as the victim of my alleged criminal activity. But as I reviewed the federal charges one more time, I noticed something that made my pulse quicken with the first hope I had felt in a week. The FBI warrant was based on allegations that I had accessed classified materials beyond my authorization scope. But the quantum encryption protocols I had developed weren't classified when I created them. They had only been classified after Meridian submitted them for Pentagon review. That meant either the FBI had made a fundamental error in their investigation, or someone had deliberately misrepresented the timeline of events to make my original research appear to be unauthorized access to classified information. The climactic twist came when I realized that Bradley's frame-up contained a fatal flaw. If I could prove the chronological development of my research, I could demonstrate that I hadn't stolen classified information because that information hadn't been classified when I created it. But I would need evidence that the FBI had already seized access to systems that were no longer available to me and had credibility that I had already lost in the court of public opinion. Unless I could find someone with the authority and motivation to investigate the investigators, Friday morning, I received a phone call that changed everything. The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, and instantly recognizable, despite the stress-induced fog that had clouded my thinking for the past week. Ms. Kellerman, this is General Thompson. I understand you've been having some difficulties lately. I was so shocked that I nearly dropped the phone. General Thompson, Yes, sir. I'm currently under federal investigation. I'm aware of that. I'm also aware that something doesn't add up about the allegations against you. Would you be willing to meet with me this afternoon to discuss your situation? Sir, my attorney advised me not to have contact with Pentagon personnel while the investigation is ongoing. Your attorney is being cautious, which is appropriate. However, I'm not calling in my capacity as a Pentagon official. I'm calling because I believe there may have been some irregularities in how this investigation was initiated. That afternoon, I met General Thompson at a small restaurant in downtown Alexandria, far from the Pentagon and Meridian offices where our previous interactions had taken place. He was dressed in civilian clothes, but his military bearing was unmistakable, even in casual attire. Ms. Kellerman, I've been investigating defense contractor fraud for 15 years, he began without preamble. I've seen every type of scheme imaginable, from overbilling to phantom employees to outright espionage. But I've never seen someone sabotage their own career by exposing fraud they were allegedly committing. I don't understand, I replied carefully. Think about it logically. If you were actually stealing proprietary information and planning to sell it to competitors or foreign governments, why would you expose your own knowledge in front of Pentagon officials? Why would you reveal that you understood technology you were supposedly unauthorized to access? The question hung in the air between us as I considered the implications. General Thompson was right. My behavior during the Pentagon meeting was completely inconsistent with someone attempting to commit espionage or corporate theft. Someone wanted you discredited and removed from the situation very quickly, he continued. The question is why? What made you enough of a threat that destroying your career became necessary? I could prove that Bradley was misrepresenting technology he didn't understand, I said slowly. I could demonstrate that Meridian was attempting to defraud the Pentagon by claiming credit for innovations they hadn't actually developed. Exactly. And that kind of fraud carries severe penalties under federal contracting law. We're not talking about career damage or corporate embarrassment. We're talking about potential criminal charges and billions of dollars in liability. General Thompson leaned forward with the intense focus that had made him legendary in military circles. Ms. Kellerman, I want you to know that the Pentagon has been investigating Meridian defense systems for several months. Not for the quantum encryption protocols, but for a pattern of misrepresentation and overbilling that goes back several years. My heart began racing as I realized what he was telling me. You knew about Bradley's fraud before the contract meeting. We suspected it. What we didn't have was direct evidence or witness testimony that could support federal prosecution. When you exposed the gap between Bradley's claims and his actual knowledge, you provided exactly the kind of evidence we needed. But if that's true, why haven't you stopped the federal investigation against me? General Thompson's expression grew grim. Because the investigation wasn't initiated by the Pentagon, it was requested by Meridian Defense Systems through their connections in the Justice Department. They claimed you had stolen classified information and were potentially working with foreign agents. The pieces began clicking into place with terrifying clarity. Bradley hadn't just framed me for stealing information, he had used Meridian's political connections to weaponize the federal justice system against me. The FBI investigation wasn't an objective examination of potential crimes. It was a targeted attack designed to destroy my credibility before I could expose corporate fraud. The beautiful irony, General Thompson continued, is that Bradley's desperation to discredit you has provided us with evidence of obstruction of justice, witness intimidation, and abuse of federal law enforcement resources. Those are serious federal crimes that carry heavier penalties than the original fraud we were investigating. What does that mean for me? I asked, afraid to hope. It means that instead of being a suspect in a criminal investigation, you're now a protected witness in a federal fraud prosecution. The Justice Department realized yesterday that the charges against you were based on false information provided by subjects of an ongoing investigation. I stared at him in disbelief. Yesterday, but why hasn't anyone told me? Why are my assets still frozen? Why is my security clearance still suspended? Because we're not done yet. Bradley doesn't know that his frame-up has failed. He thinks he's successfully neutralized you as a threat and discredited your potential testimony. We want to keep him thinking that while we gather evidence of his attempts to obstruct justice and manipulate federal investigations. General Thompson pulled out a tablet and showed me a series of recorded phone conversations. These are Bradley's communications with Justice Department contacts over the past 2 weeks. He's been actively attempting to influence the investigation against you, providing false evidence and pressuring federal officials to expedite prosecution. As I listened to the recordings, I felt a mixture of vindication and horror. Bradley's voice was clear and confident as he described me as a security risk and potential foreign agent who needed to be neutralized immediately. He provided false timelines, invented evidence of suspicious behavior, and even suggested that my technical knowledge was proof of unauthorized access to classified systems. "This is insane," I whispered. "He's lying about everything. More importantly, he's committing federal crimes while attempting to cover up other federal crimes. That's not just fraud anymore, it's conspiracy and obstruction of justice." General Thompson paused the recording and looked at me with an expression that mixed professional respect with personal sympathy. "Ms. Kellerman, I need you to know that your courage in exposing Bradley's deception has protected American military personnel from potentially vulnerable cybersecurity systems. The quantum encryption protocols you developed are exactly what we need, but only if they're properly implemented by someone who actually understands them." "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we spring the trap. Tomorrow morning, Bradley will be invited to a follow-up meeting at the Pentagon to discuss alternative arrangements for the canceled contract. He'll think he's getting a second chance to salvage the deal and his career. What he'll actually be walking into is a federal arrest." The climactic revelation came when General Thompson explained the full scope of the sting operation. The Pentagon had been working with the FBI and Justice Department to build a comprehensive case against defense contractor fraud throughout the Washington area. My situation had provided the final piece of evidence they needed to prosecute not just Bradley, but an entire network of executives who had been exploiting technical professionals and misrepresenting capabilities to military officials. "Your technical expertise will be crucial to explaining the fraud to prosecutors and juries," General Thompson continued. "But more importantly, the Pentagon wants to offer you a direct contract to complete development of your quantum encryption protocols under proper security procedures and appropriate recognition for your innovations." I sat in stunned silence as the implications washed over me. Not only was I being cleared of criminal charges, but I was being offered the opportunity to continue my work under circumstances that would provide proper recognition and financial compensation for my innovations. "There's one more thing," General Thompson added with what might have been the beginning of a smile. "Bradley's attempts to frame you have provided grounds for civil litigation against Meridian for defamation, wrongful termination, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The company's legal team is apparently very interested in reaching a settlement rather than facing trial." As we left the restaurant, I felt like I was emerging from a nightmare into daylight. For the first time in 2 weeks, I could imagine a future where my career wasn't destroyed, my reputation wasn't ruined, and my innovations could actually protect the people they were designed to protect. But the best part was knowing that justice was finally coming for Bradley and everyone who had participated in his systematic exploitation of technical professionals. Tomorrow morning, his world would come crashing down just as suddenly and completely as he had tried to destroy mine. The next morning, I watched from a Pentagon conference room as Bradley walked confidently down the hallway toward what he believed was a career-saving meeting. He was dressed in his most expensive suit, carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than my monthly salary, and wearing the kind of self-satisfied expression that comes from believing you've successfully destroyed your enemies. General Thompson had arranged for me to observe the arrest through a secure video feed, both as a witness to the proceedings and as a form of closure for everything I had endured over the past 2 weeks. The irony of watching Bradley's downfall from the same Pentagon building where he had tried to humiliate me wasn't lost on anyone involved in the operation. "Mr. Bradley," General Thompson's voice carried clearly through the audio system. "Thank you for coming in this morning. Before we discuss the contract situation, there are some federal agents who need to speak with you." The expression on Bradley's face shifted from confidence to confusion to absolute terror in the space of about 3 seconds. FBI Special Agent Williams stepped into the frame, followed by 2 other agents I didn't recognize, all carrying the kind of official documentation that ends careers and destroys lives. "Bradley Johnson, you're under arrest for conspiracy to defraud the United States government, obstruction of justice, abuse of federal law enforcement resources, and violation of federal contracting regulations," Agent Williams announced with clinical precision. Bradley's briefcase hit the floor with a thud that carried clearly through the audio system. "There's been some kind of mistake," he stammered. "I'm here for a contract meeting. I haven't done anything wrong." "Mr. Bradley," General Thompson replied with the kind of cold authority that could freeze fire, "we have recorded evidence of you providing false information to federal investigators, attempting to manipulate prosecution decisions, and systematically misrepresenting your technical qualifications to military officials." As the agents read Bradley his rights and placed him in handcuffs, I felt a surge of emotion that was part vindication, part relief, and part sadness for how unnecessary all of this had been. If Bradley had simply been honest about my role in developing the quantum encryption protocols, everyone could have benefited. Instead, his greed and dishonesty had destroyed his career, damaged his company, and nearly ruined my life. The next few hours passed in a blur of legal proceedings, media briefings, and official statements. Meridian Defense Systems' stock price collapsed completely when news of Bradley's arrest became public. The company's board of directors issued a statement expressing shock and dismay at the alleged criminal activity of their former vice president, while simultaneously announcing they were cooperating fully with federal investigators. By afternoon, the story had become national news. CNN ran a segment about corporate fraud in defense contracting with my situation, highlighted as an example of how whistleblowers are often targeted for retaliation. The Washington Post published an editorial calling for stronger protections for technical professionals who expose misrepresentation in military procurement. But the most satisfying moment came when I received a phone call from Meridian's legal department. The same compliance executive who had threatened me with career blacklisting 2 weeks earlier was now calling to discuss amicable resolution of my unfortunate experience with the company. "Ms. Kellerman," she said in the kind of carefully neutral tone that lawyers use when they're trying not to admit liability, "Meridian Defense Systems would like to offer you a substantial settlement in recognition of the difficulties you've experienced recently." "What kind of settlement?" I asked, though I already knew my attorney would be handling these negotiations. full restoration of your professional reputation, financial compensation for lost wages and emotional distress, and formal recognition of your role in developing the quantum encryption protocols that have brought significant value to our company. The irony was beautiful. 2 weeks earlier, Bradley had claimed my contributions were worthless and my role was insignificant. Now, the company was offering to pay substantial damages to avoid a lawsuit that would expose the systematic exploitation of consultant innovations. I'll need to discuss this with my attorney, I replied, but I'm glad Meridian is finally acknowledging my contributions to the technology you've been marketing. Of course. We've also taken steps to ensure that similar situations don't occur in the future. New policies are being implemented to provide appropriate recognition and compensation for consultant innovations. Translation: they were terrified that other exploited technical professionals might come forward with similar claims, exposing a pattern of intellectual property theft that could result in massive legal liability. 3 days later, General Thompson called with the news I had been hoping for since this entire nightmare began. Ms. Kellerman, the Department of Defense, would like to offer you a direct contract to complete development and implementation of your quantum encryption protocols. The terms include full recognition of your authorship, appropriate security clearances, and compensation that reflects the strategic value of your innovations. What kind of compensation? I asked. $12 million over 5 years with potential for extension based on performance and additional development needs. You'll have your own laboratory, a team of technical specialists, and direct access to military end users who can provide operational feedback. I sat in my apartment surrounded by moving boxes and legal documents, trying to process the magnitude of what he was telling me. 2 weeks earlier, I had been facing federal prosecution and career destruction. Now, I was being offered the opportunity to continue my work under circumstances that would provide financial security, professional recognition, and the chance to actually protect military personnel through advanced cybersecurity technology. There's one more thing, General Thompson continued. The Pentagon is recommending you for a Civilian Service Award recognizing your contribution to national security through ethical innovation and fraud prevention. It's not often that technical professionals risk their careers to protect military interests. 6 months later, I moved into my new laboratory facility in Northern Virginia, leading a team of 8 cybersecurity specialists in developing next-generation encryption protocols for military communications. Bradley was serving a 7-year federal sentence for conspiracy and fraud, while Meridian Defense Systems had been restructured under new management following bankruptcy proceedings. The Civilian Service Award ceremony was held at the Pentagon with General Thompson, presenting the recognition to me in front of an audience that included military officials, cybersecurity professionals, and journalists from major news outlets. As I stood at the podium, looking out at faces that reflected respect rather than suspicion, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. I learned that truth has its own power, I said during my acceptance speech. When someone tries to steal your work and destroy your reputation, the temptation is to fight dirty or give up entirely. But I chose to trust in my own worth and let my genuine expertise speak for itself. Sometimes the people in power are testing everyone's character, waiting to see who will stand up for what's right. My quiet confidence in my own abilities became my greatest weapon against those who tried to silence me. The audience applauded, but the most meaningful response came from General Thompson, who approached me after the ceremony with words that I'll never forget. Ms. Kellerman, you didn't just expose fraud or protect a government contract. You reminded us all that integrity and expertise are more powerful than politics and deception. Your courage has protected countless military personnel who will use secure communication systems they'll never know were developed by someone who refused to be silenced. As I drove home that evening past the Potomac River and through the neighborhoods where I had once struggled to pay rent, I thought about the lesson that had emerged from the most difficult period of my professional life. Truth doesn't always triumph immediately, and justice doesn't always come easily. but when you have the courage to stand up for what's right. Even when it seems like you're standing alone, you discover that there are people in positions of authority who are waiting for someone honest enough to expose the lies and skilled enough to provide real solutions. My quantum encryption protocols are now protecting military communications around the world. Bradley's fraudulent schemes are serving as case studies in federal law enforcement training programs. And I'm leading a team of innovative cybersecurity specialists who understand that their work directly impacts the safety of American military personnel. The $5 billion contract that Bradley tried to steal became the foundation for a cybersecurity program that's protecting lives and securing communications in ways he never could have imagined. Because when you understand technology deeply enough to create it, you also understand it well enough to ensure it's used properly. Sometimes the consultant really does know more than the vice president, and sometimes the people in power are smart enough to recognize that expertise is more valuable than executive titles. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where someone tried to take credit for your work or silence your voice when you knew something important? How did you find the courage to stand up for what was right, even when it felt like you were standing alone? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Thank you for listening to my journey from humiliation to vindication. If this story resonated with you, please consider liking this video, subscribing to hear more stories about justice and resilience, and sharing it with anyone who might need encouragement to speak their truth. Remember that your expertise and integrity have power even when others try to convince you otherwise. Until next time, trust in your own worth and never let anyone silence your voice when it matters most.